Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Hope you're having a fantastic day. Today, we are going to be discussing the number one way to increase your aggression and steal more pots at the poker table that do not belong to you. My name is Jonathan Little. I'm a professional poker player. I own PokerCoaching.com. I am here to help you get better at poker. And today, we are going to be discussing something that most people do very incorrectly. I see a wide range of aggression from poker players. Some players have almost no aggression in their game. They mostly call or fold when someone bets, or if they do play the pot, they limp in. They really do not like to build the pot unless they have the nuts. And that is a horribly bad strategy. Looking at your cards, seeing if it's nuts, and then loading in money, and then playing cautiously all the other time is a sure way to lose. Other players do the exact opposite of that. They are far too wild. They don't really like to call or fold. They like to raise and re-raise. They blast it in. They try to push their opponents around, and they like to win pots. They're overly concerned with winning pots. They're not concerned with winning money. They're concerned with winning pots. Now, look, we do have very clearly right here. We are going to be discussing how to increase your aggression and steal more pots, but you want to make sure you're actually winning money in the process. It's actually pretty easy to win almost every hand at the poker table. Think about it, right? Just find a scenario where you can go all in for a huge amount of money. Your opponent's probably going to fold and you're going to win. But when you get called, you're going to lose a ton. That's also a guaranteed way to lose, and a lot of the more loose maniacal players play not such an extreme version of that, but a pretty extreme version of just trying to win all the small pots. And there's a fine line between winning pots and winning dollars, but you can't go absolutely nuts. You have to figure out how to have calculated and controlled aggression, especially when your opponent's likely weak or your range on average is likely strong. And if you do this, you will increase your win rate by a large amount. So in this video, I'm going to teach you my best tip on how to increase your aggression, which will allow you to effectively steal more pots that you probably are not winning today in a manner that will result in you winning a whole lot more money on average. Before we move forward, I know some of you are not subscribed to this channel. Do me a favor, go down there, double check, make sure you're subscribing to this channel. Click the like button, click all the other buttons besides the thumbs down button. Don't click the thumb down button. Or you can do that too, whatever you want. Enjoy yourselves. I'm glad you're here. The way that you increase your aggression and steal more pots is, do you have an idea? Do we have a drum roll? It is to check raise more often. It is vitally important that you check raise more often, and most players in poker don't check raise anywhere near the game theory optimal strategy, and exploitatively, you should perhaps check raise far more often than the game theory optimal strategy. So, first, let's discuss exploiting the players who automatically continuation bet every single flop. You've seen these players who think the way to win at poker is to raise before the flop and then continuation bet the flop. That's just how they start the hand. There actually used to be a player on the poker tournament circuit. He's no longer playing. I guess he lost his money. He would raise pre-flop, and before the flop even came, he had his continuation bet in his hand ready to put it out. He always bet a third pot on every flop, no matter what. He'd raise pre-flop to 2 big blinds, get out 2 more big blinds, and have them in his hand ready to go. And as soon as you check, he'd put in that 2 big blinds literally 100% of the time. And I don't know why this player thought that was a good strategy. Maybe he thought he was playing something like Limit Hold'em, where he couldn't get check raised too much, to check raise to a large amount and force him off of his equity. But I absolutely demolished this player. I love playing with this player. A lot of players thought he was good at poker. He was a good limit player, but not a good no-limit player. Remember that on average, you will make a pair on the flop only about 30-ish% of the time. Certainly sometimes on more boards, less on other boards. But recognize that if you're facing someone who continuation bets 100% of the time, a large amount of the time, 70-ish% on average, they're going to have no pair, and maybe they have some draw some other small percentage of the time, which means half the time or more, they're going to have nothing. So what do you do against someone who's going to have nothing about half of the time or more? Well, on boards that should connect well with their range, meaning they're going to have a lot of medium strength hands, like one pair. This is mainly going to be when someone raises pre-flop and the flop is mostly high cards. You're going to want to check raise using a large size to apply a lot of aggression to their medium strength hands. And on boards where their range connects poorly, such as uncoordinated boards, paired boards, especially if the pair is low card boards. In those scenarios, you're often going to want to check raise small because now you're trying to get them to fold out ace high, king high, queen high, etc. So let's take a look at some examples. Here you have the king five of spades facing a raise from a player who automatically continuation bets. This is an awesome scenario for you right off the bat. You should be defending your big blind quite wide against this player because you already know they're going to make a mistake on the flop. Now, with their exact hand, they may or may not be making a mistake, but on average, they're going to be making a mistake. If you are confused about pre-flop defending ranges from the big blind, make sure you check out peakgto.com. That is our GTO trainer. That'll show you good, strong GTO ranges to defend with. And then from there, you can adjust to be a little bit wider against these players because you know you're going to have a very profitable check raise on a lot of flops. Flop comes, jack 6-4, we check. They continuation bet. Auto half pot. What range should you raise with? Well, it depends on the board. Depends on your opponent's tendencies, right? In Game Theory Optimal World, this is already a pretty good hand to consider check raising because against this type of player, they're just not going to have anything on this flop all that often. So, which hands want to check raise? Typically, you want to be check raising your best made hands and draws, both high equity and low equity. What's a main hand? In this spot, it's probably something like queen jack or better or king jack or better is going to be good enough to put in the check raise. What are draws? Well, a lot of people in this spot think 7-5 and 5-3, if we have them, are clear raises. Notice we probably don't play the 7-5 and the 5-3 offsuit in a cash game with no ante and a rake, but we do have the suited ones. So people think that's a solid 8 combination of hands. That's plenty. But no. On the flop, you get to actually have something like 1.5 times as many draws as you do made hands. So if on the flop, we are raising lots of ace jack and lots of king jack, assuming we have those, maybe we 3-bet some ace jacks, but we do have some queen jacks as well. Maybe that is, 20 combinations of hands, let's just presume. Maybe it's a little bit more, maybe it's a little bit less. And that means we get to have something like 30 to 40 draws. But I just said we only have 8 open-ended straight draws, so we need to find additional draws. So what are additional draws on this board? Well, it's going to be stuff like gut shots, like 8-7. 8-7 is a very logical hand to raise. But then also, you want to be raising with some backdoor flush draws that have additional equity, like a backdoor straight draw. So that means pretty much any hand that has a 5 and a backdoor flush draw and an overcard is going to be a really good hand to put in a raise. Also, a hand with a 7, like king 7 of diamonds or queen 7 of diamonds, would be a pretty reasonable hand to put in a check raise as well. So this is a spot where we are going to be check raising very frequently with this type of hand, but against the auto continuation better, you can check raise even more often than that. You can take all sorts of stuff that just doesn't really have much. Take the ace 2 of diamonds and put in the check raise, or the ace 2 of hearts even. If this player is going to fold far too often, you have a very profitable immediate raise. Now, Yanni asks, if he continues, how often should you keep betting on a total brick turn? This is where you have to play a little bit of poker and figure out your opponent's tendencies. Some players will call the flop check raise only with a pair or better. If they're going to call with a pair or better, well, you should not be bluffing on the turn very often, should you? But if they're going to call on the flop with stuff like queen 9 of spades or any ace high type hand like ace 10 or ace queen, in that scenario, you are going to want to keep betting because very often they're not going to have anything good, right? So you always want to consider your opponent's strategy. If they're going to call the flop check raise very wide, you should keep betting the turn aggressively. If they're going to call the flop check raise very tight, you should be giving up. So here, they check. We check raise to a medium amount. This is fine and reasonable. They just let it go. Let's take a look at another example. Jack 7 of spades. Another auto continuation bet guy. We call. We get top pair. They check. Or we check. They bet small. Now, this is a hand that is normally a very reasonable check and call. You don't really want to be check raising a whole lot of top pair marginal kickers. You want to be check raising your top pair best kickers. But if this player is going to bet every single time, this is a spot where we can put in the check raise wider for value because they're betting more than only a polarized range. And assuming you know your opponent's going to call your check raise decently often, like any sort of ace high, then put in the check raise and extract value, right? Now, if they're going to fold out all of their unpaired hands, then the check raise with this type of hand doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So it's not just check raise flop blindly and forget about it. You always want to consider your opponent's tendencies. So if your opponent will call with all sorts of junk, then check raising this hand is quite nice. Notice also this board is pretty good for the opponent's range. So because this board is good for the opponent's range, when we do check raise, we're going to want to use a large-ish size. Notice they're raising from the button. They're going to have a lot of middle and high cards. So they should have a lot of medium strength stuff here, like gut shots, open-ended straight draws, a pair of nines, pocket pairs, etc. So this is the exact type of player you're going to want to check raise bigger because in this spot, they should have a lot of medium strength stuff, and our Jack 7 actually crushes the medium strength stuff. They call. Now, when you get called, you want to consider what does the opponent's range look like? Like I just said, maybe this guy's calling a bunch of ace highs. Maybe they're calling only good hands. But on a lot of turns, you're not just going to keep betting, especially with your medium strength made hands. When we check raise, we have a medium strength made hand that's ahead of most of theirs. But when we get called, they lose all the garbage out of their range, right? Their range shrivels up to being a jack or a 9 or a hand with a 10. And all of those do okay against us. And if we end up getting all of our money in by the river, say we bet the turn and then shove the river, we could easily be crushed. So this is a spot where now we're going to want to check. And we're not planning to fold. We're checking, looking to check and call, unless the opponent's up to the type of player who calls check raises super duper tight and then only puts in money when they have what they think is the nuts, which is usually not the case. Check, check. River's a 2. Can we bet now? What do you think? Take a second, think about it. Write it in the chat. This is a tougher spot. On the turn, I think we have a pretty easy check when the 10 comes because they could easily have 2 pair or the king queen, maybe even the bottom end with the 8-7 for the double gut shot. But when it goes check check, this is a spot where now we have the best hand a lot. This is a spot where we want to bet a medium size to try to get called by a 10 or maybe a 9. So I definitely like betting in this scenario. Stu says this is a good bluff catcher. This is a hand that you certainly are not checking and folding, but you want to ask yourself, is it better to value bet myself? And in this scenario, when it goes check check on the turn, we have the best hand a lot. And I realize it's no fun to bet the turn or bet the river and then get raised. That is an absolute disaster. So you don't really want to be betting in this spot against players who will put you in a tough spot where you're not sure if you need to be calling or raising and you expect them to raise very frequently. Fortunately for you, in most small stakes games, most players drastically under bluff on the river against a medium or large bet. Now, if you bet $15 on the river, which I think is far too little with this exact hand, and get raised, you can't really go around folding because you will have induced your opponent to raise by betting so tiny. But if you bet medium like 45 or 60, then I don't think anyone's going to be raising unless they have a better hand. So this is a spot where we are going to be betting medium to big. And again, this depends on your opponent's tendencies. I don't think anyone's folding a 10. A lot of people won't fold a 9. If they have a jack, you're going to lose. Realize, sometimes when you value bet, you're going to get called by a better hand. Your opponent could just be sitting here with a jack, and you're going to lose to it most of the time. And that's okay, because they're also going to call some 10s, like king 10, queen 10, 10-8, and some 9s, like ace 9, king 9, queen 9. Which class or course is this from? What does that even mean? I have made so much content for all of you here on YouTube and on PokerCoaching.com. This is not a recording. We are live. Although we do discuss this concept a lot in the advanced cash game course and the advanced tournament course on PokerCoaching.com. We discuss how to exploit lots of common scenarios, or lots of common things that your opponents do wrong, and auto-continuation betting is certainly one of those. We get called. They have the ace-10. So look, notice they called our flop check raise with nothing. And it's a good reason to check raise wider, right? All right, next. You want to attack weak sizes with aggression. A lot of players will use a bet size that makes sense for their specific hand. They're not worried about their range. These players are not playing balanced at all. When they bet the turn small, they often have a medium strength hand or a weak hand. They're looking to just check it back on the river. They're trying to buy a showdown, or they're just trying to put a little bit of money in the pot and get a little bit of protection with a hand they think is probably good. There's a big problem with this, though. It is that it announces to you, well, to their opponent, that they have a weak hand And if you announce you have a weak hand and you're not actually getting tricky or trappy, which a lot of these players never do, all you got to do is raise and put them in a miserable spot. Alternatively, these players will bet large with their good hands. They have a good hand, they want to get full value and full protection, so they blast it. And maybe they do that with their draws too, but we're really focusing here on their small size. A lot of players in small and medium stakes games, when they bet small on the turn or the river, they usually have a very weak, well, not weak, not like garbage, but they have a medium strength hand like top pair, no kicker, middle pair, something like that. So what do? Well, the answer is you check raise very, very frequently. Pro Trader Key says, thank you for being here. Well, you're very welcome. Thank you for being here. I appreciate each and every one of you. I hope you're having a wonderful, wonderful Friday. Here have a raise from the hijack. We call 7-6 of spades. Flop comes, Jack 9-2. We check. The continuation bet. This is not an auto continuation bet, or this is a player who plays reasonably. That said, this is a spot they can bet pretty often. We can check raise or check call. Either play is viable. This time we call. Turns a 5. We check. They bet 12. This is a spot where if you told me I had this read on this player, and this is the only read I have, it's the only thing I know about them. When they bet the turn small, they have a medium strength hand. They'll fold to a turn check raise plus river bet unless they improve. If that's all I know, I can already tell you, I'm going to call this player's flop bet very often with any hand that has any equity whatsoever, like a gut shot or overcard and backdoor draw, whatever. Maybe even worse, maybe just like a literal overcard. And then I'm going to be check raising a ton on the turn, assuming this is a play they make somewhat frequently. Now, some players will make this play 10% of the time, in which case you need to be aware of it, but it's not something you're going to be able to use too frequently to absolutely crush this type of player. But other players will make this play with any jack, 9, 2, 5, pocket pair that's lower than a jack, ace king, ace queen, ace 10, ace 8, ace 4. They'll use this size with all of these hands, and they will fold them all if you check raise now and then blast the river. So if that's the kind of player you're against, this is going to print money by making it kind of big. We make it 50. This time they fold. Now, it's important to realize your opponent's not always just going to fold to the flop or to the turn check raise. Some players will call the turn check raise with a lot of that range I just listed, and then they'll fold all of it on the river unless they improve. Against those players, you're going to want to check raise the turn and then blast the river, probably all in for over pot, because you are trying to get them to fold a jack. A lot of these players playing 1-3 or 2-5 in your local casino or small stakes tournaments, they're not trying to go broke with only top pair when you are loading in a ton of money. However, other players will bet small on this turn with a hand like all those I just listed, only call with a jack or better, and then never fold it on the river. Against those players, you can check raise the turn very often, you're going to print a lot of money, but when you have nothing on the river, you don't want to be bluffing those types of players because they are going to be very, very, very inclined to call it off. So be aware that this turn check raise is going to be immediately profitable against both those players a lot of the time. But against some players, you should continue betting the river every time, and against others, you should not. Online, there's very little you can know about your opponent. I mean, that's not true at all. I mean, pay attention, take notes, use a heads-up display if you're allowed to on your site. You can get all sorts of tells. I mean, for example, say you get a tell, you see your opponent continuation betting the turn 90% of the time. That means when they bet the flop, they bet the turn again 90% of the time. In that scenario, that is a ton of information. It means their turn bets are full of garbage, or perhaps their range is so strong pre-flop, if you see they play no hands pre-flop, to the point that they literally have aces, kings, queens, or ace king. So depending on how the other stats interact, that's going to give you a whole lot of information, right? So don't be of the idea of there's not much to learn. If you think there's not much to learn playing online, you're not paying attention. I mean, I get that a lot of people play 24 tables at a time, and yeah, you're just trying to play good, strong GTO poker, which, to be fair, is what I do a lot of the time, especially in medium and high stakes games. But in small stakes games, you can absolutely wreck your opponents. I mean, just the other day, I was playing 4 tables at a time, streaming on Coin Poker. You can find that in YouTube in the, I guess it's called the live section. And I only played 3 hours, but an hour in, there were already some players I was trying to play pots with, and I was noting it. Like, I want to play pots with this type of player, so I'm not going to 3-bet the button, whereas normally I'd 3-bet the button or the small blind or whatever, right? And that's because I saw the players making some mistakes that I thought I could clearly take advantage of. And that was from playing for an hour while I'm just super duper distracted. My kids are running in here, saying hello, looking at the camera. I was dealing with stuff on the phone, playing 4 tables at a time, trying to talk to all of you, and I can still make these reads, right? And I'm not some sort of savant, right? So given I'm not some sort of savant, I'm just someone who has practiced this and studied a lot, you can do it too. If we check raise the turn and get re-raised, what do? We'll figure out if you're getting the right odds to continue and probably call, because at that point your opponent's range is super duper strong. How do you know which players will call down? You pay attention. You got to pay attention. You have to pay attention to your opponent's tendencies. In general, though, as you check raise the turn bigger, you're going to make them fold out more of their range. So like right here, say you check raise to 80 and they call. I'm not going to bluff the river pretty much ever. But if you check raise to 35 and they call, I'm going to bluff the river almost always. Now, I will say that to some extent, this is a spot where I probably would have gone slightly smaller just to give myself a lot more fold equity on the river. But I think that's a good way to go about figuring it out. The bigger you go, the more you force them to fold. And as you force them to fold more, the hands that are good on the turn that stay good on the river are just not going to fold nearly as often. So like, say, for example, the river is the 2 of hearts or a jack. No one's folding a jack on a 2 or a jack, right? So in that scenario, you need to be way more inclined to give up. This is not based on the opponent. This is based purely on the fact that the river did not change the turn at all. And if they called the turn, they probably have something pretty good. Now, you could perhaps still go for a small bluff to try to get them off of flush draws and open into straight draws with this type of hand. So say they did call here and the pot goes up to 140 and you bet 30 on the river. I think that's actually quite nice with this type of hand because you're trying to get them off of unpaired hands. But that's not a spot where you want to be ripping it in all that often, because if they do have a jack or perhaps any other pair, they're just going to find a call every time. If the river is something like a 10 or an 8 or a queen that connects with your logical straight draws, that's a good spot to use a big bet, because now the top pair gets way worse, right? So when the top pair gets way worse, that's the time you're going to want to continue betting very often, because your opponent's most likely continue hand is some sort of pair. Especially when you have draws that block them from having draws, right? Like that, it's less likely they have 8-7 because they can't have 8-7 of spades, or 8-7 offsuit if they have them. All right, let's take a look at another hand. 8-6 suited. Hijack raises it up. We call. We check flop. They continuation bet. We call. Turns to 7. We check. They bet medium. So this is a spot where if they bet smaller, I might just put in the check raise immediately. When they do this medium bet, I'm going to be more inclined to just call, because at this point, they're kind of saying they like their hand, right? Now, if they bet even bigger, I would also just call. This is an interesting size where I'm not sure it says a whole lot. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. Maybe this player just plays well on the turn. I think this is fine and good and reasonable. Obviously, we're not folding, right? So it's either call or raise, and medium strength made hand with a draw often likes to just call. Whatever, raise would be fine too. Why don't you lead the turn? Oh, you don't lead turns when you're playing deep stacked if you're trying to play GTO. In deep stacked poker, there are almost no leads on pretty much any turn, especially when your opponent could be there with the nuts or the effective nuts. So right here, could the opponent have 9-8 suited? Absolutely. Could they have 7-6 suited? 6-5 suited? Definitely. Could they have a queen? Obviously, yes. Could they have pocket queen, 7, 6, and 5s? Yes. The opponent in this scenario has basically as many nuts as we have. So leading here would be quite bad in a cash game where you're playing very deep stacked. As stacks get shallower and shallower, like you'll see it a lot at 20 big blinds deep in a tournament scenario, you get to lead very often, because if you have any random queen or perhaps any 7, that's just good enough to get it all in when the pot's already 14 big blinds. You can bet the turn and then jam the river for value/protection. The worst you can lose is another 14 big blinds or so. Here, though, we can lose 93 big blinds. Not that we're going to lose 93 with this hand, but this is a spot where when your opponent has lots of nuts, roughly as many as you, I realize they have slightly fewer, but they still have plenty. When you're out of position, you don't get to lead. If you are consistently leading from out of position on the turn in cash games, playing deep stacked, you need to have a very clear idea of what your opponents are going to do wrong, because you are not playing anywhere near GTO. You can, again, check all this out at peakgto.com. We have lots and lots and lots and lots and lots, millions of post-flop simulations. You can go through and check it out, and you will see you don't get to lead the turn very often. All right, we check the bet, we call. River's a 2. We check. They bet small. This is a big mistake in GTO world. In GTO world, you should know if you studied at PokerCoaching.com at all, or you've been here very long at all, the smallest bet size you use in position when playing anywhere near deep stack at all is usually half pot. That is the smallest you're allowed to bet. Allowed, quote unquote, allowed. Because when you bet small, or when you bet any amount, you open the door to get raised. And when you get raised, you're going to have to fold out hands that have some equity. Because notice if the opponent did have, like, let's say a random 7 or a 6, they don't want to bet the river for any amount, because if they bet and get raised, they're in a miserable spot, whereas they could have just checked it back and realized whatever equity they have in the pot. So, this bet from them is not good at all, especially if you know that this player's bet sizes indicate something about the strength of their hand. This is the type of bet a lot of players will make with a pocket pair lower than a queen, so like jacks, 10s, 9s, or 8s, or a hand like a 7, or a hand like a 6, because they think they have the best hand, so they want to put some money in. They want to try to get called by worse. And you know what a lot of people do wrong in the spot with the 8-6 suited? They think, okay, I'm getting good pot odds, I should call. But in reality, you actually lose basically every time with this hand. So this is a spot where calling is not even that great of a play against this type of player who you know has that range I just listed of medium strength hands that are better than yours. So, what should we do? Well, we could fold, or a much more viable strategy is to raise. And here, we are trying to get them to fold out a medium strength hand. So how much should we raise to in this scenario? Take a second, think about it. Write it in the chat. Click the like and subscribe button if you're enjoying today's show. We're not done yet. Don't leave. What a lot of people do wrong in this spot is they check raise small to like $60. They think I'm going to check raise small and they're going to fold all their stuff. But no. If you check raise, let's say 55, they're never folding pocket jacks or 8-7 or ace-7 or ace-6. They're just going to say, well, $30 to win a 160 or whatever it is. I guess I have to call. It's even bigger. It's even bigger. So they're going to call. And that's awful for you. In the spot, if we raise, we need to raise big. How much is big? It's going to vary from player to player. Obviously, you want to use the smallest size possible that will get the job done almost every time. Because let's say you do go 80, maybe that does get them to fold out some of these hands. But I think if you go really big, you're going to make them fold out everything. If you make them fold out everything, you literally steal this $106 pot almost every time. Now, if you make this play over and over and over again against the same player and they eventually find a call and they see that you have a hand like this, they're going to start calling. But until they start calling, I'm all in here. I think that is going to win the pot very near 100% of the time. A lot of people are saying raise the size of the pot. The way to figure out the size of the pot here, by the way, is you put in your 25 first. That makes the pot 130. And then you put in 130 on top. So it'd be a 155. That would be a pot size raise. And here, I'm recommending going even bigger. This would be roughly a 1.8x pot raise, 180% pot, something like that. So here, I like call in. I don't think you're going to get called pretty much ever against most players. I mean, put yourself in your opponent's shoes. Imagine you have pocket jacks here and you decide to bet the river, even if they bet 40 on the river. If you get shoved on, you're going to fold, right? I mean, I would fold. Imagine you have a 7, like ace-7 or king-7 or 8-7 or ace-6, and you make this bet and you get shoved on, you're just going to fold. And I realize that it is scary in your shoes with the 8-6 suited to make this bluff, knowing that if you get called, you lose. But this is a spot where this is by far the right play, especially if you can put them on a range of like pocket jacks down to a 6 or something like that. You're going to win the pot almost every time. The nice thing about having this exact hand too is that if they are getting tricky, they're going to be getting tricky and betting small with what? Sets and 2 pairs and straights. So notice we block pocket 6s, we block 2 pairs, and we block 8-7 and the 8-4 suited if they ever have it. So this is a spot where we are all in. How do you adjust when you check raise bluff? You get looked up. Now everyone's seen that you can check raise with nothing. Honestly, I'm not going to be adjusting all that much in the long term. In the short term, maybe you chill out a little bit, but you have to realize a lot of people aren't even paying attention, and sometimes you get called when you're bluffing. By the way, if you literally never get called when you're bluffing, you're playing really, really badly. Your bluff should get called sometimes. That's just how poker works. Because imagine you check raise all in the spot and it works every time. Well, then you should be check raise bluffing all in the spot every single time. Recognize that getting called when you're bluffing one time does not make you look bad or look crazy. Like in my spot, if someone makes this play, I just think it's good poker. I'm like, okay, yeah, they're probably a good player. I don't think they're crazy. I think they're just a good poker player. Now, some of your opponents may think that you're crazy. If you're against someone who thinks that you're crazy and now all of a sudden they're going to call any river check raise with any pair, check raise far wider for value, obviously. Right? Bluff less, check raise for value more often. It's not that difficult, especially against a small size. Now, we're not talking about this today so much, but imagine we did have a queen here. Say we had king, queen. That hand is almost always good against this bet. What should we do? Well, if we did have king, queen in the spot, which is reasonable enough. Maybe we check call it sometimes. We check raise some too. Check call the flop, check call turn, check, they bet tiny on the river. With the king, queen here, you're going to want to raise. If you got caught bluffing once or twice already in a spot like this, definitely rip it all in. That said, exploitatively, you may want to use a size that's going to get called very often. So with the king, queen, you don't want them to fold. You want them to call. So make it something like 75 or 80. I realize that's going to lose value if your opponent would have called an all-in, but a lot of players in the spot are not going to call an all-in with anything. I mean, we literally just went through it. So this is a spot where I'm going to be check raising to something like $80 and get called by a lot of that range that they bet the river with. What is the worst hand they call with? This is a hypothetical player. I don't know who this HJ player is. Hypothetical player, depends on your opponent. But most people, when they bet small, have something like a queen or worse. And if they have worse than a queen, anytime they call you, you're extracting value, right? And they're not going to call an all-in, I don't think, unless they think you're nuts. So this is a spot where they're going to call with some of that range, but that is their entire range when they bet the river. So do we go huge with bluffs and smaller with value? Exploitatively, as a start, yes. So your opponent just check the river or bet pot with jacks. No, on the river, they should bet like half pot with jacks, I got to presume. Bigger, at least. This hypothetical player will not call without queen jack plus. So, super adaptoid. That means that when you bet small on the river and get raised, you fold 90% of your range, 95% of your range. If you're folding 95% of your range in the spot, what should your opponent do? Well, they should check raise you literally every time because you are just giving away this pot. 90% of the time. 10% of the time you get it, but 90% of the time you lose the pot. You're going to get absolutely slaughtered playing in that manner. Now, you may say, my opponents never check raise bluff. Well, I would venture to say first, how do you know? if you always fold, you don't know that. But if your opponents do literally never check raise bluff, then if they never check raise bluff, then sure, fold everything, right? Because besides hands that beat their value hands. I think a lot of people in a lot of games presume they know what their opponents do, especially in very like odd corner case scenarios. I do think in general people don't check raise nearly often enough on the river as a bluff. But if you announce, I'm folding almost my entire range, recognize you're saying, I think my opponents are so horrible at poker to the point that they can't figure out what I'm doing, and to the point that they haven't studied at all and realize that they need to bluff on the river sometimes. Maybe it's true, maybe it's not, but I personally think that's a pretty big assumption in 2025. All right, next. You're going to also want to check raise more often on boards that are excellent for you. When players put money into the pot on boards where you can have the nut hands, but they cannot so much, you're going to want to punish them with aggression. On boards where they have a lot of nuts, you don't apply aggression so much. For example, say they raise under the gun and you call in the big blind and it comes ace, king, queen. You check, they continuation bet. That board's great for them. You don't want to check raise very often because they're going to have a whole lot of nut hands. And you don't so much. But if the flop comes 7-6-5, you check, they bet. This is now a great spot to raise because you have all the nut hands and they don't. And they also have a lot of just total garbage like king, queen. So when you have more effective nut hands on the flop, the way you beat these type of players is to raise far more often. You definitely want to make a point to focus on the offsuit combinations. If you have the offsuit nut hands in your range, but your opponent does not, or ideally if your opponent does not, this is an even better spot for you. Like say it comes 7-6-5, you have all the 9-8 offsuit in your big blind defending range. But they are not raising 9-8 offsuit under the gun. So you have all those straights. You might even have 4-3 on 7-6-5. So you have tons and tons and tons of straights that just absolutely crush your opponent. So that forces them to not continuation bet very often at all on boards like that. But a lot of your opponents don't know that. They're going to continuation bet every time. And this is going to allow you to absolutely crush your opponent. Also, assuming you're trying to be anywhere near balance, you're going to want to size your bluffs the same way you would size your value bet so that your story is believable. But like we just said, sometimes that does not apply, especially in spots where you are trying to target a very specific type of hand. So let's take a look at some examples. 8-5 suited. We have a raise. We call the big blind. 10-8-6. Sorry, 10-9-6. My brain's broken. We check. They bet $7. By the way, when you do continuation bet playing deep stacked on boards that are good for your opponent, you should often bet using a small size because you're not really betting. You should not be betting very often, and you don't have the nut advantage. When you don't have the nut advantage, you just don't want to put a lot of money in the pot. So what do we do with this 8-5 on the 10-9-6? You want to ask yourself first things first, do we have 8-7 offsuit in our range? The answer is obviously yes. Did they have 8-7 offsuit in their range? Not if they're anywhere near decent at poker. Some people will, of course, but if they have 8-7 offsuit, they probably have a whole lot of other stuff too. So this is a spot where we want to be check raising with our best hands, decent 10s and better, and draws. So what are draws here? Any hand with an 8 or a 7 is a very obvious draw. Front door flush draws, back door flush draws. This hand's great. Notice we don't really want to check call out of position with the 8 high. So this is a good hand to go for the check raise. They bet 7. We're just going to start blasting it. We are raising here because we have pocket 10s, pocket 9s, pocket 6s, and all the 8-7s in our range. And, while they do have the sets, they are completely lacking the 8-7. Also, consider the rest of the opponent's range. It's going to be mostly unpaired high cards, right? So given they have a lot of unpaired high cards, assuming they're betting with more than only the nuts, which, may or may not be true, this is a spot where we want to raise very, very, very frequently. Now, if you are against someone who does not continuation bet the spot very often, and when they do, they have either a really good made hand or a draw, and that's it, you got to chill out a little bit because, while you do make pocket aces pretty miserable by the river, by check raising flop, betting turn, jamming river, they're going to have some good flush draws, good straight draws, and just like over pairs that a lot of people don't fold. So you have to be a little bit more careful against those types of players. But if you told me this player is going to continuation bet the flop small frequently, this is an excellent spot to raise because they have a whole lot of unpaired hands. Do we check raise pure on this board with back door draws? Well, you know what we can do? We can go over here to peak GTO. Let's take a look at the spot. Real quick. We go over to the library. Give me just a second. We're going to load this up. Let me make sure it's in the frame somewhere, at least somewhere reasonably in the frame. Give me a second. I was not planning on doing this, but you all are curious, and I want to show you what GTO looks like here. A lot of you are completely unaware. And I don't want you to be unaware. I want you to be aware. All right. We're going to take a look at a spot in a tournament because the ranges are a little bit looser like they will be in cash games. Here we have a raise from, let's say, under the gun +1. That we have 8-5 suited in the big blind. We call. Flop comes 10-9-6. We check the flop. Notice in this spot, they should not be betting all that often. They actually bet a little bit more often because it's a 10 and the 9 compared to if it was lower, but whatever. They're mixing between all sorts of sizes here. As the stacks were deeper, they would bet smaller. Let's say they do use the small bet size, though. What do we do? Notice we're going to be raising with, actually, because their range should be so strong, maybe this is not the best example. We're going to be raising with stuff like random 7s, right? Notice all these random 7s. Notice all these random 8s, right? So all these random unpaired hands with 8s and 7s are putting in the raise. Notice our 8-5 exactly is not, and 8-4 is not, 8-3 is not. We're not raising all of them, but we are raising in this scenario with this type of hand, right? Also notice we're raising some 10s, some overpairs, 2 pairs, 8-7 for the nuts. And so that's roughly what the strategy looks like. But exploitatively, your opponent is not using this strategy. A lot of players will instead bet frequently and small. So they're taking a lot of these unpaired hands up here that are using bigger bets a lot of the time, and they're betting small with them. Also, their range could easily be wider than this and contain just more junk, right? Like random ace-X. A lot of people raise ace-X too much or suited connected junk too much. And This is a spot where we do want to be raising a decent chunk of the time. Let's make the board even better for us. Let's say it was something like 8, 7, 4. Now we check. Let's say they bet. Notice again, they should not be betting all that often. They're only betting 42% of the time now. Say they do happen to bet medium, let's just say. Notice the hands that are raising again. We're going to be raising a lot of hands with a 6 and a 5, right? So there's lots of 6s and lots of 5s are putting in the raise. But if your opponent's betting too frequently, you get to raise more often. It's just a good, strong exploit. We're actually going to have exploitatable sims in Peak at some point in the future. So you'll see that in these scenarios, you can actually raise way more often. So anyway, that's the type of hand that really likes to raise, hand with an 8 or a 7 in this spot, and exploitatively, as your opponent bets too frequently, using a small size, on boards that are good for you, you should raise very, very often. We discuss this thoroughly in the advanced cash game course and in the advanced tournament course on PokerCoaching.com. All right, here we have a raise $10. We call. 6-4-3. We check. The continuation bet. Great spot to raise again because we have the 7-5s, and they do not. We also have the 5-2 suiteds, and they do not. Plus, we have the sets and 2 pairs. So, great spot to raise. Now, you could certainly call here. I think calling is reasonable. Let's actually run this one through Peak real quick. Let's say hijack raises, folds us in the big blind. No. Hijack raises, folds us in the big blind. Notice we don't have the 5-2 offsuit. 7-5's close, but I would probably call the 7-5. So we call, say it comes 6-4-3. We check. They bet. So they are using some small sizes here. Notice we're going to be raising a lot with hands containing 5s, mainly 5s, right? And like random overcards, like 9-7, for example. Take a look at what 9-7 does. See down here? 9-7 is raising a large chunk of the time, even without the draw. So lots of hands with 7 are raising, lots of hands with some 8s are raising, and lots of hands with 5s are raising, right? What about Jack 7 suited? Do we raise that? Notice Jack 7 of spades is raising a ton. Now, again, you may say, that's not every time, so we should call a lot, right? And essentially the answer is exploitatively, if your opponents are betting too frequently, you raise more often. How come you have a 3x open size for cash games? Because that is what most people use in most scenarios. Now, obviously, if your opponents raise smaller, you got to defend wider. If they raise bigger, you got to defend tighter. You have to use a little bit of common sense. Most people in real life use a 3x. I mean, what do you want to do? You got to presume the opponents are playing some sort of strategy. Okay, so anyway, that's the type of hand that likes to raise, and exploitatively, you can raise more often. I mean, and if you told me, if I was sitting at a live cash game table and you showed me this simulation in the middle of the hand, not that you're allowed to do it, we're not playing at WSOP final tables or anything where they do it sometimes. Haha, did you like the joke? They didn't really cheat or anything, in my opinion. Rules need to be clear. In this spot, if you showed me like 9-7 is check raising 26% of the time, 9-7 offsuit, or not with a flush draw, I'm going to raise this 100% of the time. Why? Because people are going to fold too often against the raise. Take a look what they should do if we do raise. They're supposed to call with all backdoor flush draws. You think your opponent's going to call random backdoor flush draws like Queen 8 of hearts? A lot of people don't. What about Queen of clubs, Jack of spades? You think they're going to call Queen of clubs, Jack of spades against the check raise? You think they're going to call Jack of clubs, 10 of spades? I don't think anybody's calling the flop check raise with these hands. You think they're calling random like ace 10 with a spade? Ace 9 with a spade? Ace 8 with a spade? I don't think so. You think they're calling with the bad end of the gut shot for the ace 2? I mean, maybe they do, maybe they don't. What it amounts to is I don't think people call check raises often enough. So if they're not calling check raises often enough, what should you do? Well, you should continuation bet more often. So to make the opponent's matters worse, notice how all these hands are already using like mixed frequencies. They're not betting all the time on the flop. That's why it's only like half the cell filled. I think a lot of people bet these hands too often, like all of these offsuit hands. And then I think they fold them too often against the raise. So we have two things really working in our favor in this type of spot. I think most people continuation bet too often, and I think most people fold too often to the raise. So that's going to make me check raise way more than what a GTO output would say. So you need to know what the GTO output looks like You need to know what the reasonable hands are to raise with, and then you need to expand on it a decent chunk. Now, as your opponents make bigger and bigger errors, you should be expanding on it more and more and more. And it's hard to know exactly how far to expand, but you need to know where you're starting from so that you can expand logically from there. The right answer is not just check raise everything. I mean, it could be check raise everything, but it's probably not the right answer. And the right answer is also not check raise at the GTO frequency, because the opponent is clearly making some mistakes. So always consider what they are doing wrong so that you can adjust to exploit them. So to recap, check raising is something most players do not do often enough, and you need to learn to do it effectively. Remember these 3 key spots to check raise. Number 1, when your opponent continuation bets too often. Number 2, when your opponent clearly demonstrates the strength of their hand, and they say it's weak by using weak small bets. And number 3, you want to check raise on boards that are excellent for you and bad for your opponent. We discussed the advanced tournament and advanced cash game course, and we are actually wrapping up our New Year's sale at PokerCoaching.com, where you can save up to $1,100 on Poker Coaching Premium. The sale ends very, very soon. Check it out right now at PokerCoaching.com/New Year's. We have a ton of tournament content on PokerCoaching.com. If you go and look around at other poker training sites, they're trying to charge $1,000 or more for an 8-hour course. Well, all these courses and a ton more are included at Poker Coaching Premium, including the Tournament Masterclass. It's about 40 hours long that goes through all sorts of common spots you need to understand. We have the Advanced Tournament course that goes through a few more advanced concepts, sort of like we did today, but way more advanced. Also, we have Hal Draftganger, one of the best players online, won $2.8 million in what was, I think, the biggest online tournament ever. He won it in his barn in the backyard and streamed it all for Poker Coaching members. We also have Aram Zobian, super crusher, especially in large field tournaments. I mean, to be fair, he's crushing Poker Go too. He discusses how to run deep in these large field tournaments. We have Shannon Shore, who just won 2 tournaments in the Poker Go studio last week. He discusses how to crush every stage of the tournament. I've been learning a ton through his content. And we have high stakes tournament secrets from Super Goat David Peters. I think he's in the top 10 amount of caches in the world. That's just a few of the courses on tournaments. We have a whole lot more. We also have a lot of content on cash games. I have my cash game masterclass, which is about 40 hours long. Again, we have the advanced cash game course going through a whole lot of exploitative spots and intricate GTO spots you need to understand. We have Jonathan Jaffe going through and discussing crushing tough cash games and also maximally exploiting to crush the cash games. We have the hero's journey, where I have been coaching Slick Rick on his way up from tiny stakes when we first started playing. He was playing 50-cent dollar. He got all the way up to 25, 50, sometimes bigger over the course of a year. And having a lot of fun with it. And finally, we have Jay Wynn. Jay Wynn's an excellent video blogger. He gets in there, he battles, and he discusses beating loose live cash games like the games he is playing in Texas. So you can get 3 months of Poker Coaching Premium that gives you access to all of that I just went through and a whole lot more for $241. You get to save $200 there. If you sign up for a year, though, you get to save a ton. Over $1,000. Let's just say 500. This is wrong. You save more than 500. You save $1,100 if you sign up for a year. And look, I realize that $1,000 is, or $664 is a lot for most people, but assuming you're trying to get good at poker at all, I strongly recommend you study poker at least some. And I know you can study on YouTube. I mean, a lot of you here are going to pick up some tips from this video right here. It costs you $0, and you're going to go and you're going to apply it, and you're going to win more money, which is what I'm going for. But I do think you need to study poker a lot to get very good at it, unless you're just naturally talented. I am certainly not naturally talented, and I had to work really hard to get good at poker. I worked very hard without any of these resources that I'm literally spoon-feeding to all of you. And if you do not want to devote $2 a day to improving your poker skills, well, you're probably not going to make it. It's going to be hard to win if you are not willing to devote time to actively studying poker. And the nice thing about PokerCoaching.com is that we have these courses like the Tournament Masterclass and the Cash Game Masterclass that line up all the content in the order you need to be consuming it. We have tons and tons of quizzes that make sure you're actually understanding the content so that you can get in there and crush the games both quickly and effectively. Because imagine you stumbled around YouTube trying to find all of this information. Maybe you could find it, but it would take you a ton of time, and your time is valuable. And especially once you get to where you're winning $30 per hour at $1, $3 live or something like that, you're going to be way better off getting stuff consolidated for you and given to you in the most logical order so that you can get to the tables as fast as you possibly can. So anyway, check it out at PokerCoaching.com/New Year's. You have a few questions. I'll answer those before we wrap it up. Am I streaming tonight? I am not streaming tonight. You are broke. I'm definitely not broke. We have a $2,000 free roll tonight. We're giving away $2,000 to all of you. We've been doing it for the last, 6 months or so. Hope you're all enjoying the money. How much money is that? That's a lot of money we're giving away to you all. Thanks to Coin Poker for making that happen. You are broke, LOL. One thing I always think is really funny is that when people on the internet think they have any clue about the monetary situation of other people, because I know a lot of people well. Some of them are filthy rich, and some of them are broke. Not these guys here, but a lot of poker players. But luckily, I'm one of the ones that's not going to go broke. I was watching the story of Jesse Lonis the other day. Good, strong, world-class young player. He gets in there. He battles harder than most. And he talked about how he was like on his last bullet a few times. And now that he's gotten a hold of some money, he's never going to go broke. And it's funny because I watched that video after I played with him last week, and he was sitting next to me, and we were chatting. We were always friendly. And it says something, I was making a joke about losing 4 tournaments in a row or something. He's like, buddy, you ain't never going broke. And he's right. I'll probably be broke next week now that I said that. In a cash game, we're on the big blind. It limps around to us. Is it better to check and see the flop or raise if we don't have a marginal hand? You want to be raising mostly good hands from the big blind because you're going to be out of position. So you don't want to do a lot of raising from out of position in general when you can help it. You're enjoying the live streams. Good. I'm glad to hear it. I sold you. $664 is a good price. Also, on top of that, I know some of you are skeptical. You should be skeptical of all things on the internet. Hopefully my track record of doing good at tournaments. I mean, look, we got a bunch of trophies back here. Check out Jonathan Little GPI. You'll see that I've done well at poker. You can Google all the poker coaches who I have hand-selected to teach you. Google every single one of them. They all have excellent success. If that's not enough, if you sign up for PokerCoaching.com and you do not like it, for whatever reason, let me know within a month of signing up and I'll give you all of your money back. Because if I do not help you get better at poker, I do not want or deserve your money. We're going to be consistently adding new content to PokerCoaching.com. You see, we've been doing it for only the last however many years we've been going, 15 or something like that. I've had a training site. And I'm not going anywhere. We're here to stay. We're consistently upping our game, working hard to improve our skills. And secretly, is it a secret? It's not really a secret. I tell you all sometimes. I make PokerCoaching.com not just for all of you, but also for all of me. All of these coaches are people I want to learn from. So it's like me getting coaching from all them that I then get to share with all of you. So it levels me up, and I fully plan on continuing leveling up for my entire life. Played poker 20 years and broke even. 2 years ago, you bought Poker Coaching Premium. You made $40K in 2 years. Nice. Glad to hear it. Can't wait to get the Elon brain and crush you. Yeah, that might change things. How much does the Cash Game Masterclass apply to 1-2? Very much. Is there a sale on 1 month? No. Where you can go to the free rolls. PokerCoaching.com/free roll. I speak fast. I mean, English is my third language. I do my best with it, but I try to give you all information as quickly as I can get it out of my head and into yours. Your prices are good. Yeah, and like I said, if you don't like it, ask for a refund and I'll give you a refund. I'm not here to try to scam anybody or put out some content that I made over the course of 10 hours and then forget about it and leave you all alone. That's not what we're doing. Hopefully, we've proven that by being here for only the last 15 years. I made your red line positive. Glad to hear it. All right, that's it for today. I have to go to the gym. Then I have to go get my kids. My kids are currently in chess after school, grinding it out, trying to get good at games. So I'm going to go grind at the gym. Then I'm going to go get the kids. We're going to go out to a nice dinner. Good luck in your games. Have fun. I hope you all have a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful day. Hope you have a wonderful new year. I know the year is already 17 days in, but you might as well make 2025 your best year yet. No matter your situation, resolve every day to do your best, work hard, apply yourself, enjoy yourself, and add value to everyone else around you. And if you do that, good things will come. Thanks for being here. I'll talk to all of you next time. Bye-bye.